about to begin. We want to welcome you to the Vampire and Devil Show. We want to welcome you to the Vampire and Devil Show. It's gonna be bloody fun. We're gonna kill everyone. Welcome to the Vampire and Devil Show. With lots of blood and lots of guts. Two horror fanatics and rock and roll nuts. Welcome to the Vampire and Devil Show.
And fiends, our beloved fangs, we've got a special episode for you guys. A very cool conversation, a very, very special topic. But my beloved devil, I have a question to pose for you, because this deals with your realm. When there's no more room in your realm, when there's no more room in hell, what do you do, man? How do you handle it?
I let George Romero come into the world and bring us the zombies. And yes, we are going to start our first of many series of directors slash writers that we're going to talk about their bodies of work, their works of their bodies, and all that good fun stuff. And why not go with the king of horror, the godfather of zombies, even though in his movie they were never called zombies, they were ghouls. But we call them zombies anyway, because without George Romero, you wouldn't have had all these cool zombie movies like Zombieland. You wouldn't have Walking Dead. You wouldn't have, all these great zombie movies that have come out throughout the years without the late, great George Romero.
Absolutely, my friend. Of course, the late, great George Romero, who we have discussed. He is the legend amongst men when it comes to, and probably up there with, if not the largest, of course, contributor to putting not only horror on the map, but just a very specific genre on the map. Of course, all my beloved clan, all my beloved people that flutter around have been well documented over film history. In fact, I just recently got my hands on a Laserdisc version of the beloved Nosferatu. But anyway, when it comes to vampires, for example, they're kind of littered throughout film history when it comes to just various contributors to that. But when it comes to zombies, while now, of course, in modern time, everybody kind of has their hand in the cookie jar. Everybody has their various visions and the way they see zombies across the world. But George A. Romero is unanimously considered the guy who put zombies on the map, consistently brought zombies in various situations, and really started it off and got the interest going in the zombie genre.
Yeah, and he kind of put Pittsburgh on the map as well. A lot of, he filmed a lot of his movies in Pittsburgh, and then Pittsburgh kind of became a go-to place for a while. Like a lot of great filmmakers have come into Pittsburgh, like Kevin Smith did a lot of his movies early in Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh was a cheap city to come to and to film. And then, eventually, other stuff happens and politics happen and you have to get out of the city. But yeah, I mean, we, definitely, he definitely used Pittsburgh, just like, a lot of movies you have, these people are doing that, or Stephen King is always usually most of his movies are tied in with Maine or around that area. Like a lot of George Romero films, especially when we start talking about these early films of George Romero. They're all filmed in Pittsburgh, around Pittsburgh. They all mention Pittsburgh. It's definitely, a lot of the actors he uses are just regular folks that he was like, hey man, we're filming this movie come, we need extras and stuff like that. And some of these people have launched their careers, I guess, or whatever you want to call them as far as that. But these iconic zombies and these iconic characters have kind of all came from, George going, hey man, let's just film kind of, cheap, very low budget, but let's just, take pride in where we come from and show this side of, Pittsburgh, and let some zombies get some meat.
Absolutely, 100%. So, yes, of course, our dearest and beloved living dead. This is, and welcome to the George A. Romero episode of Vampire and Devil, where we are going to jump into the various lengthy catalog of George Romero. However, though, highlighting specific favors for myself and for Devil, because with all of those movies, if you're not willing to be strapped into a 5-hour episode, we wouldn't be able to break them all down. So we're going to highlight kind of like the greatest hits as well as our personal faves. But, of course, my beloved Devil, I believe there is only one way to start this off, and they may be coming to get you, Barbara, but we are coming for our beloved ghouls and fiends. So let's attack them, and let's start everything off with, of course, Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, this is, there'd been movies before that came before that kind of had zombies, and a lot of it was more towards like the voodoo side of zombies and like that, like the voodoo side of it and stuff like that. Where really it wasn't about these living creatures that were coming out from the ground and, attacking and, eating flesh, So it was very, 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 very like, beginnings of like this type of movies and this genre and stuff like that. And like I said, at this time, this was in the 60s when this movie was made. And, that's definitely very 60s. We've talked about it with the remake that we were talking about when we did the Night of the Living Dead remake. I mean, the same thing was like that. This movie was very, had a lot of the things that were going around the time in the 60s with people protesting against the war, racism and stuff like that. So this movie definitely had a lot of that feeling in it too. But, like I said, it was just a straight up, like, it was cool to see, these, ghouls going around and just feeding off flesh, you know what I mean? He put an African American in a lead role, which was basically sort of at this time was almost unheard of, especially with a white director.
Yes.
And he was just like, let's go. We're gonna have fun, and he's gonna, kind of bring back, the horror genre, because at the time of the 60s it started, the 50s and stuff like that were pretty big for the horror genre, and then kind of in the 60s, in the late 60s, the horror genre was kind of fizzing out a little bit, I guess, or people weren't really as interested in it. And then they were like, George is like, okay, let's make a movie that's gonna make people sick, and and show things that, at this time, when you watch it now, it's like it's super super generic almost. It's very like, oh my god, this is not scary at all. But I mean, at the time, they had never seen anything like that. They didn't see these undead creatures trying to eat people in movies.
No, absolutely, because like you said, it stars Dwayne Jones, it starts Judith O'Dea, like you had said, as a minority hero, a minority star of the movie. It was definitely not common, but I mean, it's great. And yes, of course, there is, when it comes to this movie, that I find it's not about whether or not this movie holds up to modern time, because yes, especially with the change in special effects. While the special effects at that time were definitely very solid, and they, led into what Tom Savini does, and how, as he perfected his craft, how better modern, modern, effects came, practical effects. Of course, it leads now into CGI, and there's a combination of both. So, yeah, you might look at a movie like Night of the Living Dead back then and be like, I don't get it. I don't understand. It looks weak. It looks watered down. But that's because you're looking at like stuff nowadays where you've got, 28 Days Later and all of those various kind of zombie movies where you have just so much at your disposal to be able to put towards the crafting of it. But the movie was ahead of its time. It was the real first, but also just like you said, yeah, people had dabbled in it. There's of course White Zombie starring Bela Lugosi. That's kind of one of, if not maybe the earliest, for lack of a better term, zombie movies. But 100%, like you said, that's based off voodoo possession style. Honestly, kind of like the bath salt scare that that the country went through a few years ago. Those type of reactions, that kind of like dead way of feeling of a body. But anyway, getting back on topic, Night of the Living Dead, of course, it started everything off. It spawned it all, and it started George Romero on an absolutely amazing, amazing trajectory of his career.
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, and like you said, then you go into that, he's done, he does another movie, he does the Season of the Witch movie, which was a pretty cool movie. Like I said, it wasn't, other than Night of the Living Dead, it really started getting into what I started getting into, which is like the first movie that, when we were deciding to do this George Romero, episode, I was like, well, I already know the first movie I'm going to watch, which wasn't Night of the Living Dead, because I've seen that movie so many times. I can talk about Night of the Living Dead till the cows come home, and I would never watch it again. I've seen that movie so many times. It's just like veered in my brain. So I'm like, okay, let me go and start watching some of these movies that maybe I haven't seen in a while. Some of that I have seen, some I haven't seen. So the first one I started off with was The Crazies, which, if you hadn't seen this one, was remade, I think in the 2000s or sometime around there. But anyway, this one was such a crazy movie, and it's just like, like some movies you can kind of tell are in a certain genre, or a certain, time area and time frame and stuff like that, where, some are like, you can definitely tell this is a movie that came out in the 80s, or this is a movie that came out in this time. This movie was definitely very 70s. There's no way to get in and around it. It's just you can timestamp 1970. And like I said, it did come out in 1973. And yes, just so cliche and so just late 70s, just all throughout the whole entire thing. It's just so funny.
It definitely is, and it's got that feel to it. And it's funny because like this was, I forget offhand if you and I discussed this movie when we were deciding on our, remakes that are better than the originals. But, no disrespect to this particular movie, but the more modern day Crazies, it was definitely a more crafted movie. And we won't get deeply into that, but again, you can chalk it into modern technology, modern effects, the ability to do more as definitely a possibility probably for that. But The Crazies is still an incredibly fun movie. Definitely does feel dated. You definitely know it's an early 70s movie. But it's, again, also worth talking about this movie like we are, because it is still an essential part of George's catalog, and where the common populace, like we discuss every episode about, people are going to think zombies first. Of course they are. But he's not a one-sided director, never has been. There's other movies that we're going to get into that have reasons that they tie in with like rock bands. There's other, movies we're going to get into shortly that deal with bloodsuckers. George was not all about zombies. And I thought it was very cool that while The Crazies had a little bit of that dated kind of broken feel to it, it wasn't about going back to the well. It was about, I've always now got that, and I've got more in my head to showcase, but I want to go this direction next.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like I said, it was another movie that was filmed around the Pittsburgh area. This one was Evan City. And, back in, when I used to live in the Pittsburgh area, we had friends of mine that were in a band. I don't remember what the name of the band is offhand anymore, but they always open up their set with a clip from the Crazies where the guy's like, "Fuck Evan City and burn it to the ground," and that was literally like the thing. And the only funny thing about the whole entire movie with this, where they talk about in the movie, they're like talking about Pittsburgh, and they're like, "Yeah, it's like, about 10 minutes from there, you can see Pittsburgh from here." Anybody who is from Evans City knows that Evans City is about 45 minutes to 50 minutes to Pittsburgh. It's not a quick jump. I'm like, unless you're going 90 miles per hour, you're not getting to Pittsburgh that fast.
Right.
But but like I said, I loved it. Like I said, it's watching it back again. It's like I forgot how kind of crude and kind of uncrafty it is versus like the predecessor one that came out. But then again, it was this is 70s, so it's you gotta chalk it up to the 70s. But
Absolutely. And it does tie in as well with it works for George. It also kind of works to a certain degree with what, like I said, brought him to the dance, but it also segues to other people's mindset of future directors and where they wanted to go to things. Where the Crazies is based around all these people's reaction to the poisoning they received from a military nuclear weapon. Well, you can see how that could be zombie reference as well. That also does, in a certain way, work as a predecessor to what became another kind of legendary franchise in Return of the Living Dead, where that specific design of zombies were 100% based off a nuclear poisoning.
yeah. Yeah, and then the Crazies come out, and that's when George starts solidifying himself as not a one-trick pony, because it did pretty well. I mean,
Yeah.
people enjoyed it, and then the next movie that he does is one that's near and dear, I know, to you, because it's a vampire movie, and I'll let you talk about it. I'll let you talk about a little bit more, but to me, I thought this was a cool movie because it wasn't a traditional vampire movie and it wasn't done in a traditional vampire way.
Not at all. And like you with Night of the Living Dead, I've watched this movie so many times. I can talk about it all day long. But like the Crazies with you, it still was the first one that I went back to when it came to George Romero for this episode, just to kind of refresh on some things. I just have always loved this movie and always had a soft spot for it because George had also said that this is actually his favorite movie that he did, which is very, very interesting considering the abundance of zombie movies that he's known for and that we're going to break down, as well as just other things he's done, whether it was Season of the Witch, whether it was Bruiser, whether it was The Crazies. But he had a very soft spot for Martin. And I personally have always loved this movie because, yes, while I do prefer the overall skeleton of the traditional vampire, that is what I would like, that is what I prefer. But I can appreciate a fresh take, a different look, a different style, or something that could be a possibility. While there are franchises, well, look, I can't knock their popularity, as in Twilight. I don't have to pretend like I like it either. It's not my style. It's not what I believe in. It's not what a lot of my people consider to be proper. But anyway, when it came to Martin, I liked the idea of it because, again, there's little subtle nuances to why a person maybe felt or thought or acted this way, where this guy basically believes himself to be a vampire, but he's not. None of the traditional ways to kill a vampire work on him. He pretty much shrugs everything off. By the end of the movie, yes, a very common way to kill a vampire is used. But over the course of the movie, he fathoms himself a vampire, but he has no fangs. He would poison people kind of Jeffrey Dahmer style and then cut them and drink their blood with a razor blade. But, of course, it would lead them to ultimately bleed out, and that would basically be their common real-life deaths. And he's making his way kind of kind of cross country, like town to town, working odd jobs like grocery stores and stuff like that, and like looking for different ways to like get victims. Other people are coming at him with things like crucifixes and garlic, and he's just kind of laughing about it. And it doesn't work on him for that obvious reason that he's not a vampire. But then, of course, ultimately gets caught up to where the death of a person and a third party victim believe that he was the murderer, and a stake to the heart, and it's a wrap on Martin.
Yeah, which I mean, vampire or no vampire, a stake to heart's gonna do it anyway. So it's like no matter what you are, I mean, unless you're some other, supernatural creature, you're more likely gonna get killed by a stake in the heart. Whether, like I said, whether you're a real bloodsucker or you're not. Yeah, and I like that. I like the whole like it's a vampire movie, yes, but kind of no, because
Right.
there's no real vampires in the movie. And like I said, I like the fact that yeah, he did it. Where some vampire movies where they've made them, later on in years where they were kind of not vampires, but they pretend like they were vampires. They still did the traditional route where they had the fangs, but they were more made like metal or something like that. Or you used, or like in some movies they used the ring that has like a little sharp point so they can poke it in and do like that. I thought it was cool to use a razor blade. I thought the razor blade worked very well. They used that in the marketing of the poster with the razor blade. So I thought that was a cool way of like, yeah, I mean, if you're a regular person, what's an easy way to get somebody's blood out of you without having a honking huge knife or something on you? A little razor blade's easy to hide, easy to conceal, and easy to, slice somebody up and do some, get some blood pumping action going.
Absolutely. It's my only little regret when it came to losing George Romero was that I was fortunate enough to meet him, but then when it came to choices of things to get signed, so much to choose from and stuff like that. And while I always tend to go vampires first, no matter who you are, it was just that idea of like, I mean, but dude, it's Night of the Living Dead. It's the thing that started it all. It is what he's associated with, and it hangs on my wall loud and proud, and I love it to death. But there is that little bit of me that's like, damn, not a DVD, not a poster. Unfortunately, I'll never be able to get anything that's signed for Martin. Doesn't mean that I'm not on the lookout for the potential existence of a signed Martin something, and I'll cross that bridge when I get there with my beloved vampire dollars to see if I feel like spending a couple or what's potentially being asked. But it's my only little regret in the loss of the great George Romero is, at least as far as me doing it in person, won't be able to get something signed for Martin. But absolutely have my poster hanging on the wall. But Martin,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just a great one. It's a fresh take. It's a very, very cool idea. And it does give me a little bit of the feels when it comes to knowing that somebody so highly associated with a horror villain has a soft spot for vampires as his preferred number one movie of his own catalog. But
Yeah,
getting back
yeah.
to zombies and getting back a bit to Pittsburgh, let's why do you say, Devil, that you and I go and do some shopping at the mall?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good segue when you're talking about, you wish that you have met him again and got Martin. The last time that I got to see, George when he was still with us at Monster Mania, I've got the pleasure of meeting George a few times. I got to go see the premiere of I got invited to the premiere of Land of the Dead, which we'll talk about when that came out when I was living in Pittsburgh. But the last time that I got to meet him, I had him sign my Dawn of the Dead DVD because out of all the zombie movies, Dawn of the Dead was always my favorite out of all of them. I
Mine
told
too.
him that I'm a huge fan of Night of the Living Dead, but I told him I think that the Dawn of the Dead is a way more superior film as far as the zombie film goes. And he looked at me and he's like, yeah, yeah, you gotta agree with it. I told him about doing the remake of Night of the Living Dead. Told him Tom's version of I get blasphemous looks when I say it, but I think it's a better film, and he agreed. And then someone was like, "Why would you say that to George?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know how George is. Like I said, I got the pleasure of meeting him a bunch of times. But yeah, Dawn of the Dead is like probably the movie that started me as far as it. I mean, I do remember seeing Night of the Living Dead, but I'm pretty sure like Dawn of the Dead was probably like the first one that I like hardcore remember watching and remember seeing as much, just because it was such a cool movie. I liked it because, being a kid, growing up and seeing these movies and stuff like that, and seeing the color and the blood and all that kind of stuff with this movie. Yeah. And what a better way to do it than in a shopping mall. And a shopping mall again in Pittsburgh area. It was filmed in the Monroeville Mall, which a lot of people have gone to now, and they still the mall, as malls get diminished and destroyed and kind of aren't around nearly as much, the Monroeville Mall is still up and running. They do a dead museum that you can go and check out and see some cool props and stuff throughout the dead, George Romero films. But yeah, I mean, this movie to me is the epitome. I mean, it's again another political kind of movie. It starts off very, very kind of racial and stuff like that, as far as the race and stuff like that, with not racial, but like talking about racial issues and stuff like that, where this guy goes in and he's trying to they're trying to clear these houses because there's all these zombie monsters and stuff like that, and he's just going in and killing everybody and calling everybody spics and the N words and everything else, and he's just going around blowing up everybody. And like I said, this movie for me brought us Ken Foree, which
Yep.
I've been a huge fan of his, and this is the movie that where we get to see him, just another George Romero using another African American as a main character again. He's bringing that wall down. I mean, like I said, this was filmed more in I think it was like what 78 was filmed, and it was a movie that really was a crazy time. He wrote this while he was in Italy hanging out with Argento.
Yep.
And he came up with this kind of idea of like, I think just the whole mall concept of like, where would you want to go if you were in a zombie apocalypse? And the mall is the perfect place because you have everything that you need. You got clothes, you got food. It's kind of funny that in this movie there is a gun shop in a mall, even though theoretically that really wasn't in the mall. That was actually filmed outside of the mall, but I think it's kind of funny that a mall would have like rifles and shotguns and stuff like that, which that'd be kind of interesting. But yeah,
Yeah, could,
unfortunately,
could you just imagine
most
just
malls
like,
are not gonna let you. Yeah,
but could you imagine that, Devil, just like buying a rifle or shotgun, a handgun or whatever, just in a mall, and then just like walking into the record store, or going to or sitting down in the food court to eat a sandwich?
yeah, or even like I said, you just basically just buy a gun. Like nowadays, could you imagine? You bought a gun in a mall, and now you can just go on a fucking killing spree in the mall.
Right, seriously. It's like, okay. It's like, no, hey, if anything, it's like, hey, look, yeah, we can sell you the gun, but you got to come back without it for the ammunition. like
Yeah.
another day. It's crazy,
Yeah.
like all that kind of stuff. It's definitely a different world that we live in now. But I do think it's cool that movie was this kind of like initial hybrid of Romero and Argento. I mean, that's so cool. I mean, we love both of those directors, and we've talked about George already. We've talked about Dario already. So it's kind of cool to get to talk to them again on this specific episode.
Yeah. And again, like I said, with this movie too, it's like, it's crazy. He uses a lot, again, he uses a lot of Pittsburgh native people. He uses a lot of like, just people who are within the area, whether they're actors or not actors. Like, hey man, casting call, we need a ton of zombies because we have all these zombies walking around the mall and stuff like that. He uses, he's not the only person to have ever done this, but he uses a lot of people who are real amputees in this movie as zombies. So like if you had a zombie that like all of a sudden gets his, guy gets his arm ripped off and then turns into a zombie, obviously it's a lot easier to do with somebody that has their arm lost. So
Yeah.
you just throw on a little prosthetic and a little blood and guts, and boom, you do that. And I like that. I mean, even the, we talk about remakes of movies. A lot of George Romero movies have been remade. We talk about The Crazies and Night of the Living Dead. Dawn of the Dead was all remade too. And even they use that same tradition in that movie, where in the basement part or the like parking garage, you had the zombie that had no legs that was running after people, and that's what it was. It was a guy who was amputated from the legs down. So they still kept with that tradition that George did, where that's the if you're an amputee, that's and you want to get into acting, that's the thing to do, man. Go to horror movies, because they're always looking for people who, especially just for maybe not for like main roles and stuff like that, but for like little side roles and stuff like that. It's cool because it helps them out as far as not having to do a lot of extra special effects, because you have to like green screen and do all this other stuff like that to make it look like they got their arm ripped off, where it's so much easier to make a fake prosthetic and rip it off and make you can put all the ooey gooeys in it.
Absolutely, for sure. And I love that kind of forward thinking. I mean, it's awesome. It makes sense. And it also reminds me of something it's common knowledge. You can look it up and read all about it. But the late great Robin Williams was known for having in his contract of movies that they have to hire, I think it's like a minimum of like 10 homeless people to work on the film in some ways, whether it be helping in catering or doing this, that, or whatever it is. I don't know the specifics of where they had to be able to work, but that was in his contract. It's like, in order to hire me, you have to do this for me or you don't get me. Which I think is that's incredibly cool. That's very genuine. That's a great forward way of thinking it. But just like you said, with George, that's amazing as well, because that would be great for somebody who maybe has issues when it comes wanting to be an actor, but feels that there's limitations or lack of maybe seriousness that would be taken of them, despite how good they would be. But maybe kind of bridging the gap starting here to at least kind of help get that exposure, as well as the financial benefits that could come with it as well, along with that as well. So I think that was always very, very cool that George did that to begin with. Again, like you said, not the first, but that he definitely made it a point to benefit, though, in a positive way, of not only the ability for more actors to find jobs, but also the cost effectiveness on the other side of the coin from the money that needs to be spent in order to make a movie. And yeah, absolutely, the fact that they stuck with it for the remake of Dawn of the Dead, super awesome. Which again, I think is an excellent remake too. Where
Yeah.
a lot of times they drop the ball on a lot of these remakes. They didn't drop the ball on that one. I think the 2004 or whatever it is, Dawn of the Dead, is excellent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, with this movie, bigger, maybe a little bit bigger of a budget than the Night of the Living Dead. So for all you fiends and ghouls out there that like your body counts, we actually have a total body count in this movie that I actually know. There are 17 humans dying in this movie and 78 zombies, apparently. Somebody has watched this movie and totaled how many people get whacked, whether they be human and or zombie in this movie. So if you're running totals, yes, that's 17 humans and 78 zombies that get killed in the Dawn of the Dead.
No, absolutely, for sure. So let's bridge a little bit, man. Let's finish our shopping. Let's leave the mall, but let's hop on our motorcycle and take a little cruise for our next movie. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, another movie that a lot of people don't know as much, and again, you're going with another movie that isn't particularly in the wheelhouse, you would say, as it's not a zombie movie, and it's not really even a horror movie. It's more of a fantasy realm with Knight Riders,
Yeah, kind
and
of.
not the Knight Rider with the talking car. This
Yeah,
is Knight Riders like knight in shining armors. Knight Riders, not yeah, no talking cars in this movie.
no talking car. No, but it definitely has a Mad Maxy feel to it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's pretty cool. Like I said, it stars one of my favorite stunt actresses, who eventually becomes more of an acting role, and she was in the remake of the Night of the Living Dead that we talked with Tom Savini with Patricia Tallman. She's the main character in this movie. Her and I think it's Ed O'Neill, I think is the actor that was in Knight Rider. If my memory
Yeah.
serves
Ed
correctly,
Harris.
I believe it was
Harris.
Ed Harris. That's what it is. Not Ed O'Neill. Ed O'Neill's Al
That's
Bundy.
Al Bundy, brother.
That's Al Bundy. Yeah, Al Bundy was not in Knight Riders, but Ed Harris
But
was
Ed
in Knight
Harris from
Rider.
The Rock.
Yep, which is a good, I guess right now, kind of like a good segue because Ed Harris was in this movie, and Ed Harris was in a movie that I continued when I started watching more of the George Romero movies, which was Creepshow. And
Yes.
Creepshow, for all you people, like I love that George Romero loves working with talented, actors, talented writers, like we talked about Argento and him kind of producing that, and later on people will talk about a movie that they did together. But in this one, it was written by the great Stephen King.
Yes. Absolutely, for sure. And I mean, dude, what can you say? I mean, Creepshow is Creepshow. I mean, yes, written by Stephen King. There probably no better just screen for a guy who's not writing screenplays, but you know what I mean. There may just not be a bigger gift from the man upstairs from as far as being able to write a screenplay or give us the book that leads to one for our beloved genre than Stephen King. And Creepshow, I mean, it's very high up on my list. I am very huge. I'm very big. I'm huge on anthology movies. I just love anthology movies as long as they're done correctly. I don't want to watch like 5 or 6 like movies in a movie because then it becomes harder to track. But you give me just 3 solid mini movies, wrapped in a bow, I'm in it to win it. Whether it's the Creepshow series, maybe with the exception of Creepshow 3, because that definitely pains me a little bit. But I love Creepshow. I love Creepshow 2, and I love Trick or Treat, where anybody who's familiar with me knows how much I love that movie as well. And of course, being a Terrifier guy, both of us being Terrifier people, I'll throw a little love in there to All Hallows Eve, which is in that ballpark as well.
Yeah, and you were talking about, Creepshow 1 and 2, awesome movies. I love it. Creepshow 3, yeah, not as much. But then they do have the series that recently came
Yes,
out a few years ago, this last couple of years, the AMC Creepshow, which I like. It's kind of
me too.
bringing back, it brings back that kind of old school way. But yeah, the cool thing about this movie is not only did George Romero, direct this, like you said, it's an anthology of a few stories. You have Stephen King, who wrote the screenplay for this. Stephen King, loves to be in movies. You have the skit or story with Stephen King in it, and then it opens up the movie with this little boy that's reading these comic books, and his dad is like and throws away the comic book, and the little boy who was in this movie is actually Joe Hill, which is Stephen King's son, who is not even now is a huge writer, director himself, with movies like The Horns and like that he done.
Black
So it's kind
Phone.
of cool. It kind of has this whole family kind of like ties to this movie. It's got so many like ties within George Romero and Stephen King.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, between Horns and Black Phone, I mean, those 2 movies alone are just like, it's mind blowing to see that cool little tie-in. Because we talk about Kevin Smith, he loves putting his daughter into movies. She's been showing up in his movies practically from the time that she could crawl. And
Yeah.
but it's cool seeing those things because even if his son just decided to just be a lawyer or a musician or a waiter. It's kind of cool though that the apple didn't fall far from the tree, that he got this exposure in horror movies as just a casual acting position, but now has shown that he has legit skills and style and a great creative mind to continue on with giving us more great movies, that coming off of his books. Because I mean, like I said, Horns is great, but I thought Black Phone was amazing.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, when I remember watching this at the time, I would have never realized that that was, you know, Stephen King's kid. It
Same.
was more later on when I got older and I found out. I'm like, hey, that's awesome that, you know, that you can, like I said, if you would have never done anything. I mean, now he's, you know, an established, like I said, established writer. Some of his stuff has been, you know, his books have been turned into movies and he's done stuff. But like I said, like you said, if he would have just been an average Joe, he would have, you know, it still would have been cool to at least have that in your repertoire. Because I mean, you know how, you know, it's, you know, you're the son of Stephen King, so you're kind of always going to be living in his shadows, I guess, for some point of it. But it's cool that, you know, like I said, even if he wouldn't have gone into this, it's something that he can be like, oh yeah, I remember going on doing this with my dad. 'Cause I'm pretty sure, you know, they probably, you know, when Stephen was filming his you know, scene, they were like, hey man, we need a little boy for the beginning of this, and he was like, hey, have it with me, you know, we'll just we'll
I
just, you
have
know,
one of those. I have one of those with me. Let me just go to the car.
yeah, yeah, and then, you know, like I said, you know, and then like you have the stories that are within these creep shows 1 and 2 that are just like some awesome ones. I mean, there's the ones that always get me the most that I love out of all the creep show movies. Obviously, I love the Stephen King one with him, you know, touching the asteroid thing that comes down, the meteor, and it comes down and, you know, turns him into this green kind of green monster. But for me, out of all the ones, you know, you have the Happy Birthday to me with the Father's Day cake is iconic, and I love that. But to me, one of my favorite ones was in Creepshow 2. I liked the one people that a lot of people didn't like nearly as much was the blob kind of one in the water.
The
You know,
rap.
I thought that was kind of cool. The raft, yeah, I thought
You and
that
me
was
both, dude.
a
That's
cool
actually
one.
my
I
favorite too.
love that one, and I love the Indian one. I love the, you know, you know, the Indian statue that comes out. But yeah, the first movie, yeah, I mean, it's awesome. It's got, you know, it's got the monster in the crate that is everybody knows now, and you know, it's very, you know, like I said, you have the birthday, and you know, you got tons and tons of roaches and a cat, and you got everything is cool. Like I said, I like these. I
So
love these
much
short
money on road.
stories of these. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We were while I was doing some you know, researching. I found out that they spent $125,000 in roaches just for the one scene, and you know, throughout this, because in the if you haven't seen Creepshow, one of the stories is about a guy who's just like his whole entire house is just infected by roaches, and he just keeps constantly trying to kill them because he's like a huge germaphobe kind of guy. And yeah, I mean, it's if you do not like roaches, do not watch that movie because they definitely spent $125,000 in roaches. That's how many roaches were in that movie.
No, but I'm definitely with you, buddy. I mean, in general, yes, Creepshow 1 is the way, but I do love The Raft. I love that movie so much in Creepshow 2. Me and Mrs. Vamp have watched it a bunch. I've actually got a poster on my wall that's signed from Creepshow 2 that's gotten signed from some actors over the years. So I've actually got Randy, who's basically the main guy from The Raft. I've actually got the actor that played Chief well, I think it was Whitehead or
Oh yeah,
Wildhorn,
I think yeah.
the actual Indian, and from the third anthology movie of Creepshow 2, I've actually got the actor that played the hitchhiker as well on that too. So
Okay, yeah.
my
Thanks for the ride, lady.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for the ride, lady.
Thanks for the ride, lady. Man, I remember watching that.
Getting from
Dude, I probably drove my parents crazy after seeing that because I was going around nonstop. Thanks for the ride, lady. Every time my mom would take me somewhere or somebody would take me anywhere, I'm like, thanks for the ride, lady.
Oh, no, absolutely, and definitely like being going out to one of our future cons whenever he gets booked, having another opportunity to meet Tom Savini, so I can get him on my creep show too. Is there's so much for that man to sign, of course, in your and mine's collective arsenals of memorabilia, but adding him onto a poster that's already been getting signed. Is definitely what I would like to get him on. So come on, some of our beloved MMC and NJ horror cons. We need a return of some Tom Savini when you guys can make that a thing.
Yeah, yeah. And then, just like how we're talking about, we love these anthology films. He goes right, George Romero goes right into doing a screenplay for one of my favorite anthology films, which was Tales from the Dark Side.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of that series. I thought that was one of the coolest movies growing up, and just like the stories and throughout that movie was just insane. Like I said, it's just it's to me it's up there with the Creep Show as far as an anthology horror film.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I mean, it's so good. It's so solid. I love Tales from the Dark Side. I like a lot of those, like 80s, early 90s, like low budget, but kind of well written shows that maybe didn't even last very long because, again, they either came out firing too much and then it kind of fizzled out, or it just didn't really get the.
Yeah.
But like Tales from the Dark Side, I love that series. Tales from the Crypt is they had a real run, so they don't really fall into
Yeah.
this. I'm just throwing it out for the sake of anthology TV series. But I was also a really big fan of Friday the 13th, the series. I
Yeah.
love that series. I thought the concept of it was excellent. I thought it was a badly titled movie because similar to what many fans bitch about when it comes to the Halloween series with Halloween 3, it's common. If you look it up, you'll understand why it actually was called Halloween 3. Because the speed version of this is that John Carpenter was supposed to do a series of Halloween movies that were all supposed to be different. That's why they were all called Halloween. Halloween was always going to be Michael Myers. That had a really good reception. That's why they did Halloween 2 with Michael Myers, but it was supposed to stop there. Halloween 3 is called Halloween 3 technically correctly because that was the arc of the purpose of what John was doing in these movies. It's just a new story to tell. The problem was people really got into that Michael Myers character more than John realized, and it was more of a backlash, obviously, than they expected it to be, which is why it continued on with the Michael character. But anyway, Friday the 13th was already long established with the Jason Voorhees character. So while I understood the concept of not Friday the 13th Jason Voorhees, but Friday the 13th, the day of the week and the bad, like the day of like, and the bad luck that comes from it, I understand why they kind of went that direction. Just not my world's favorite title of something, considering it was already pretty established like what
Yeah.
Friday the 13th was attached to in Horrorland. But anyway, those series are great. Tales from the Dark Side, absolutely awesome, like so much fun. But let's also get back into what brought us to the dance, and let's get back into George. Let's get back into zombies in particular, but let's also talk about George's admitted favorite of his zombie movies.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, out of all the zombie movies, yeah, he's gone on record saying that Day of the Dead is his favorite one, which is kind of, I mean, I guess is sort of, to people who are zombie fans, kind of like, really, it's like, and like I said, it's definitely got its strong points. It's definitely got its weak points. And I understand certain parts of it, why I love it. And that's why I love this movie. I mean, it's cool. It's a continuation of the Dead series. It's later on, these, people are in, that are in an underground bunker, but it brings you, it's got, to me, it's got better kills. It's got the better, special effects. It's got the people, got the iconic scene with the guy getting ripped in his stomach, ripped into pieces, and the guts going everywhere. It's got one of the cool scenes towards the beginning of the movie where the zombie gets his head chopped off, and by the helicopter blade.
Yep.
And and it's just a cool concept, and it brought another iconic character, sort of like, like you were saying, with these movies where they weren't really supposed to be, these characters weren't really meant to be iconic, but became an iconic character, kind of like with Hellraiser when the first Pinhead, because he was just known as, like, you know main lead Cenobite.
Yeah, like main
He didn't, yeah,
Cenobite and
yeah, he didn't even have a
head
name.
Cenobite.
Yeah, yeah. Where in this movie, you have one of the fan favorites in a zombie witch, Bub,
Mhm.
was like, he became a huge iconic figure that people have like had tattoos of him on there, and it was such a cool concept because it was kind of like this, these zombies are known as like brainless kind of fiendless ghouls, and it was kind of showing you that this evolution of these zombies kind of evolving a little bit, and it goes on to it later on as we talk into the more of the zombie movies. But this was like the first time you ever seen a zombie kind of use somewhat of intelligence. He saw the guy come in the room that was military and gave him a salute. He was listening to a Walkman. He's looking at a book. You can definitely tell, he has a gun and he knows how to use the gun, and you know, cock it back and do all that stuff. So it's basically showing, that these creatures that we thought were mindless ghouls sort of do have some remembrance of what they were or who they were. Not to maybe not to an extent where they're gonna, you want to bring one home and give them hugs and kisses and think it's your wife or something like that. They still want to eat you,
Yeah.
but at least maybe you can kind of use them, which is sort of a concept that later on became a movie. I don't know if you've ever seen, but a lot of these fans may not have seen it, but there was a movie called Fido that came out years ago, which was kind of like sort of like a bridge of this movie where they've learned to live with zombies and they use them as like kind of donkeys, I guess, sort of is a good word. Like, just kind of like manual labor, and they're able to do like little bits and things, and that's what this kind of reminded me of a little bit, where it was like, yeah, it was something that again, George put something in a movie that no one's ever seen, because like I said, you have these zombie movies and stuff like that, but yeah, no one's ever seen kind of a zombie that's able to think somewhat. And yeah, Bub was awesome.
No, absolutely. Because honestly, besides Bub, the only real zombie that kind of gets remembered around that time for being their own kind of thing is really Linnea Quigley's trash in Return of the Living Dead. But it's still not 100% a straight up comparison, because the fact of the matter is, just like you said with Bub, he's shown this real knowledge. Like, they kind of touch on it in Dawn of the Dead of like, well, why did all these zombies end up showing up to the mall? I thought we'd be safe there. Well, probably a little bit in their subconscious, previous life stuff they were used to doing in life and going places that they did as a daily regiment kind of a thing. Where, yeah, he's learning things, showing things, shooting, moving, listening to music. Where with Linnea, it was more of that she's the first real kind of zombie that you specifically remember that character. But at the same time, let's be real, a lot of that stems from, let's say, her performance piece earlier in that movie. But Bub's a completely different thing, because he really did show the arc and the like changing of the zombie character, which does bridge to when we get to Land of the Dead. We can go into more detail of that.
Yeah. Bub, he didn't have the benefit of some big titties,
Facts.
which made his character a little less memorable, than Linnaeus Quigley Trash, because who's not gonna remember a completely naked redheaded zombie coming at you? I'm like, come bite me anytime you want, man. I don't even care. I would just be like, whatever, let's go.
Yep, absolutely no problem. And we'll get to tell that to Linnea too in a few months.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And then like you were saying, not George is known for these iconic horror movies, but then like I said, every time he starts, he brings out a new zombie film, he always backs it up again with another movie that's kind of out of the genre again. It's not out of the genre, but out of the zombie genre, which the next movie he did was Monkey Shines,
yeah,
which is
brother,
like
let's
kind
take
of
a
an
trip to the petting zoo.
yeah. It's such a crazy movie because like it's a complete opposite of like all the movies that he's ever done. Where it's like, if you haven't seen it, it's about a guy who becomes paraplegic and he needs the assistance of a monkey that's trained to, help him out in his daily lives and stuff like that. And iconically in this movie, they talk about where, is it a female monkey? Because female monkeys are a little bit less docile. And in reality, it supposedly was a female monkey in this movie, but in real life, it was a male monkey that they used
Yeah.
for the filming of this movie.
No, absolutely. And it is kind of crazy too, because like, yeah, it's this, this guy with a bright future and this star athlete, whose life is taken away from him from getting hit by a truck. And yeah, in a world of what's commonly known as usually like dogs that are typically what are used to like aid the people with like injuries, they're basically the main service animals that you think of. Yeah, it was a monkey that was featured when it came to this. And the actor, the actor's mother was very like, was definitely a crazy character kind of alone in this movie too, because I mean, Alan's mom's pretty domineering and stuff like that, so it's pretty crazy on that stuff. But yeah, I definitely remember hearing a lot of back and forth on what the gender of this monkey was, because it's that combination of like female monkeys being maybe a little bit more crazy, but also at the same time, as you can expect, being more motherly. So the idea of a female monkey aiding this man does kind of make sense. But like you said, in reality, it was a male monkey that was used.
Yeah, yeah, and you got to think too. We've been talking for about 50 minutes with these iconic George Romero movies, and movies that are etched into the annals of the music movie history. And yet, Monkey Shines is the first actual major productive movie that was like that had a movie studio. It's the
Yeah.
first like huge studio film that George Romero did with a new studio, with studio at that time was called Orion.
Yeah, having like a real studio, a real budget. It was all these, an hour's worth of talking about movies, of which we've already talked about, nearly 10 movies, and they're what you technically would call independent films.
Yeah.
So,
It's just crazy to think, that, and you go into this, and like I said, I like Monkey Shines. It's always been, a particular favorite of mine, but it does kind of show that sometimes not always just because you have a big studio behind it, you can kind of tell in this movie too, where yeah, things are kind of weird, and it's kind of like things where maybe he would had to do certain things because you have a studio that's telling you, you have this money that's telling you, okay, well, you need to do it this way or you need to do it that way. So it's definitely like, this movie, as far as I love it, but as far as like the creativity, it's kind of weird. It doesn't look as much as like in its wheelhouse as it would normally be. And then probably a lot of that has to do because the fact that it was, a studio. And like you said, you have those studio executives that are like, no, you're doing this and you're doing that and stuff like that. So yeah, it kind of goes weird. But then, in typical George fashion, he says, screw the studios and goes back and he's like, you know what, I had so much fun, writing with Dario Argento. Let's do a movie together. And I know you have two eyes and I have two eyes, but do we have two evil eyes? And yeah, George decided to, come back and do another sort of anthology. I guess this one's not really, I don't know if you really consider it an anthology because it's only two films, but it's, it's a story with two films in it. And the first one is written and directed by George Romero, and the second one is directed and written by Dario Argento. So they finally, they've always wanted to work together, and they've worked together somewhat, but this is the first time that they've actually like come together fully on a project.
yeah, it's kind of, I guess technically, while anthologies are typically considered 3 movies or more, I guess this would fall slightly closer to what typically would get referred to as grindhouse features. where it
Yeah.
usually was two movies of some type of like interspliced talent, where it usually is like, the director of this movie but will appear in this movie, and the director of this movie will then appear in that movie, kind of a thing. So it definitely is kind of like that thing. But Two Evil Eyes is cool, man, and I love of all. I mean, the combination of like Romero and Argento. I mean, dude, how can you miss? Like,
Yeah.
so I love the fact that George is like, look, that's cool and all, and I can appreciate the benefits of the. 'Cause that's the one thing about George. You never heard him slam anything, whether he liked it or not. So like, he was a very peaceful guy, and yeah, I'm sure, especially being very established, set in his ways, expecting to be able to deliver a certain product. There are expectations and demands that, of course, I'm sure he had. But to his credit, there's really no real documentation of him like outwardly slamming anybody. So maybe he didn't really love the big budget design, or maybe too many cooks in the kitchen that may or may not have happened behind the scenes with Monkey Shine. But it's cool that he's not afraid to go back to more of that independent style, get to work with people that were his friends and people he wanted to collaborate with again on maybe a smaller scale. And again, he still does have big budget stuff that we will talk about in a little bit as well. So it wasn't the end of like mainstream theatrical releases. But I do like the fact that he was like, all right, yeah, that was cool for my last one, but now I want to go and do this. It's very similar for rock and metal or horror punk fans out there to like the story of the Murder Dolls, where if anybody's familiar with Joey Jordison from Slipknot, who started the Murder Dolls, they basically got signed to Roadrunner Records, simply, which had Slipknot at the time, basically out of a courtesy to Joey. But Roadrunner did not believe in the Murder Dolls project. They were like, dude, you're Slipknot's drummer. That's the band we back. Look, if you want to do this, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. We'll put out your album, but we're not going to put out any money. We're not going to promote it. This is just your kind of thing. So it's that same kind of thing where it's cool that George is just down to be like, that was cool, but now I feel like doing this, and this is my bro, so we're gonna collab again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like I said, the crazy thing about this movie that I read that I didn't even know too was that apparently Harvey Keitel, who was in the movie, I guess there is a scene where he has a decapitated head, and he wrote a letter to them and was like, apparently his like agent was like, yeah, the Harvey Keitel is not allowed to be in the same room or see any photos or see anything that remotely has to do with this severed head. And they were kind of like, I guess, like, okay, whatever. And I guess, like, years later, somebody came up to Harvey and asked him, like, I heard about this letter, that you didn't want to see your head in Two Evil Eyes. Like, was there a reason? He was like, yeah, I didn't want to have nightmares. So it's like Harvey Keitel is like, basically, not really particularly known for being in horror movies. He's primarily in more of the actions, the Quentin Tarantino movies and stuff like that, which just have some violence and some blood, but not particularly horror. So it was like, yeah, it was kind of like, yeah, I'll be in this movie, but yeah, I don't want to see my own head and have nightmares of seeing my own head. Where most people are in these movies, a George Romero movie or whatever movie, they're like, can I keep my head? Like, am I allowed to have this? Like, that'd be awesome just to have one of my heads on my shelf. Where he like kind of went the opposite route. He's like, yeah, I don't even want to see a picture of it.
No, absolutely, for sure. And one of the things I also always thought was cool about this movie, not because it like referenced it or did anything like that, it's part of the basis of this movie, is that being that you and I are also very much into our macabre, anything that's involving Edgar Allan Poe is awesome. And this one is based off the case of Mr. Valdemar from Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, 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 and it's cool. And like I said, George Romero is always bringing in the family and people who've worked with the family. Like he said, with working with Argento and stuff like that, and then working with Stephen King and having Stephen King's son in it. But also in this movie we have the kid from Maxim, the main kid from Maximum Overdrive is in this movie too. A little bit older, it kind of like I forgot that he was in this movie, and when I seen him in the movie, I'm like, wait, that kind of looks like the kid from Maximum Overdrive. I mean, obviously he looks like he's definitely older because he kind of got taller and skinnier and looks a little bit like a few years older. But I'm like, and then I found out, I'm like, oh yeah, it is the kid from Maximum Overdrive, which is it's awesome that he brought in another Stephen King actor into the fold.
And it is also pretty cool though too that when you look at a band like Two Evil Eyes, it's kind of fun, to reference that, 22 years later from the movie that kind of started it all for George Romero, that they found a way to sneak a line into the movie that's very kind of reminiscent of Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting too. So for the fangs that don't know, when you're watching this movie, there is a line where they say, "They're coming to get you, Jessica," and I just thought it was kind of funny because it was like, yeah, it was like bringing back. I mean, I would imagine that like they were like, oh yeah, okay, this is kind of bring it kind of full circle back to from the coming to get you, Barbara kind of reference to it. So I thought that was kind of funny. I I'm not 100% sure whether or not that was probably in the script or not. I would wonder if that could have been just kind of just off the whim, and George probably was like, dude, that's funny as shit. I'm leaving it in there now.
Yeah. No, for sure. But I mean, Two Evil Eyes, it's fun. There's so much like cool stuff, and also it keeps the relationship with Tom Savini going as well as he makes an appearance in Black Cat and stuff. So it's just a very very cool thing. But I want to bridge our way into our next movie as well, which is actually very high up on my personal list of like George Romero movies. It's absolutely in my top five and might even make a case for my top three. I've just never actually sat down and hammered out my top five or my Mount Rushmore of George Romero movies. But this is a movie that not only do I just love it because I love the story behind it, I'm a fan of the cast because I've always also just been a fan of Jason Fleming. He's been in so many different stuff, whether it's mini side characters that just are still kind of memorable, or just stuff that he does star in as quality characters. But also, my personal music taste ties into this movie as well. But let's talk about Bruiser.
Yeah. I thought this was, when we were talking to our beloved Dr. Chud at the New Jersey Con, we were kind of talking a little bit about this. And I completely, like, when I was going through my list of movies that George and things that George products that he's done, I forgot that he had directed a Misfits movie, and that kind of Misfits music video, which tied into this movie where it was kind of like, I guess they were at the time, this was the second coming of the Misfits with Michael Graves's Misfits from the 90s, the 90s version of the Misfits. And I guess they were like, they had this song that they wanted to make a music video for, and they were like, well, who can we get to make this music video? And why not try to get George Romero? I mean, it's fucking George Romero. So I guess they got in contact with George and was like, "Hey, would you want to do this music video for us?" And George was like, "Sure, but I'm getting ready to make a movie, and I need a band that's playing in this club. And so, if you'll be in my movie, I'll direct your music video, and make some, we'll have like your song in it, and we'll have to do, I think they did one or two songs for the
Yeah.
movie, I believe. But that was pretty much like the contract was just like, hey, I do you a solid, you do me a solid, which you don't see too often in like nowadays, where it's like it's all about like, what can you pay me, what can you pay me, what can you pay me, where this was kind of like, hey, we want you to, you're an iconic director. We'd like you to do a music video. And, they probably came to the point where they were going to pay. They were probably going to be like, okay, we know we have this amount of budget that we probably are willing to give George. And George was just like, fuck it, I'll do it for free, pretty
Yeah.
much. Just do this project with me, and we'll just call it an even swap.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really cool scene. They play songs like like Bruiser, and I don't believe it's Fiend Without a Face, but it might be like Fiend Club or something. But yeah, they do a couple of songs in that. But the music video that we are also referencing for any fiends and fangs that are unfamiliar is the video for Scream.
Yep.
Which is a great song. Absolutely. It's off of the famous Monsters album from 1999, and it's just a very, very cool song. Very, very cool video, and it's exactly what you would expect, being from the Misfits and George Romero. But anyway, when it comes to the Bruiser, like I said, I just think it's a really cool video. It's basically kind of in that ballpark of like an American Psycho. It's basically about this cat who just this guy, I mean, who is just living a very basic life. He's not overly stoked about the world. He's just kind of going through the motions, but he's got a basic enough life. And then it really just kind of starts falling apart. From his love life is falling apart. He's hating his job, and he really kind of becomes, in a reference to the Misfits song, like I said, Fiend Without a Face. He just started becoming this just faceless, honestly, we've used the term enough, so I'm just going to use it again, zombie that's just kind of going through the world, and he just, is just kind of like no real direction. He's just kind of over life, and he's just kind of over all the negative things that are bringing him down, which basically leads him to become, like a psycho killer.
Yeah. It was such a cool concept too, because like you saying, he's just kind of out of it, kind of faceless in a crowd, like people just don't really pay him any attention or any mind. And he's at a party, and the one of the hosts of the party is making these masks for people, and for their people that are at this party, and kind of the masks to like kind of interpret them or how they feel and stuff. And he makes a mask that's kind of doesn't do anything with it. He just makes just a plain white mask, and he wakes up in the morning after the party, and he can't take the mask off anymore. It's on his face. He tries to rip it off at one point and scratches himself, and then does the weirdest thing I think I've ever seen in cinema history, I guess, or in real life, where he's wearing this this white face, and goes, well, I can't go out in public in this because I have this white face. I look weird. So I'm going to put on some really, really shitty makeup, because I'm a dude that's never done makeup in my entire life. And the natural skin tone that he would try to do actually looks more disturbing and weirder than just walking around with a white face mask.
It's so weird, dude. It's so bizarre. And it's also kind of funny, too, because this is actually also considered a French film.
Yeah.
Which I always thought was kind of interesting. But no, it definitely is, dude. It's a weird, like, design, he ends up like, and the movie ends with him still alive, kind of doing what he was doing. Authorities, people are coming after him, and like a good horror villain, or like a good, like, like political, like, prisoner or something, he just kind of slips away, and the movie kind of ends with him, like, happy, with a slightly different look, like different hairstyle, working a different job. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of, like, the end of the Thriller music video, where you think everything's like cool and fine, and then Michael Jackson turns around with that grin and those glowing eyes, and that's how it ends. It has a very similar feel to that, where he's just kind of like, yeah, you know what? I did all of those, and I got away with it. And I'm just this guy now, but you never know.
Yeah. it's just a crazy, thing because like you said, he's going around and you keep seeing him, and he's not sure if he's hallucinating, like if the mask is real. But then you're kind of figuring out like maybe is the mask not real, and it's just something in his subconscious. But then whenever you see like tapes of him or footage of him, it has the mask, but then all of a sudden the mask isn't there anymore. So it's so weird. It kind of reminded me a little bit like Fight Club,
Yeah.
where like you think that you're talking to Darth, I mean, he's not really there. So to me, it's kind of like maybe the mask wasn't there, and even though we're seeing that mask, maybe the people who are reacted to the mask is how they're reacting to it is basically just him and his mind them reacting to it too.
Yeah.
So yes, that's just a cool, crazy kind of like you can kind of think it one way or think another way. But yeah, and with this movie too, it's not only is it iconic because like I said, people who are in the music world with the Misfits and huge George Romero fan, it's the last movie that George Romero did that didn't have anything to tie with the Dead series. It's the
Yeah.
last movie he did, which wasn't a zombie, movie that was affiliated with the Night of the Living Dead in the Dead series.
Yep. No, absolutely. It's just, and it's like a whole kind of different concept, but it was the last one, yeah, that really did bridge that gap. And like I said, for any of our beloved fiends and fangs that want to go out and watch the music video, you'll see that it does tie in. Even the music video ties in as a part of that, that family tree of like movies,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So thought that was very, very cool for sure. And then
Yeah.
and then as we precurse into the next movie we're going to get into, I actually think it's a good time to have just a small discussion on like different type of like mini influences and the stuff that also started appearing around that time that tied in with George Romero or paid tribute to George Romero. And one of those is what's become a very popular zombie movie in its own right that I actually didn't see for a very long time, despite the fact that it got reviews and thumbs up from George himself. But again, this was many, many years ago when it came to like parodies, for lack of a better term, where I was kind of sensitive at the time. Bands I like now that are kind of parody bands of stuff I grew up on, I wasn't willing to tolerate. Like goofy rip-off horror movies poking fun at stuff I care about wasn't stuff I was willing to tolerate. And then again, as I got older, I started realizing that, look, when it's done well, fun is fun, funny is funny, and you should enjoy things that are funny. But I was not willing to give this movie a look in any way for many, many years, despite the thumbs up. But I love it now when I got kind of over myself and decided to watch it, and that is Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, which is, to me is like was the complete opposite. I I was I'm I was a Shaun of the Dead fan the minute that it came out. I was a huge fan of Simon Pegg and his work before, because he was in a couple TV series of back in England and the BBC stuff that he did with the TV series called Spaced. That was super super cool. But yeah, for me, like I liked it because I like just like Return of the Living Dead. I'm completely cool with a movie that's comedy based horror as long as it's well written and well acted comedy. Like, you know what I mean? It's not, and that's where Shaun of the Dead kind of runs into, where that's it's those guys' love letter to zombies, but not taking it kind of serious. So it's a very comedy style version of movies where it's on its own, it's a killer fucking zombie movie straight
Yeah.
up. And as a comedy movie, it's a funny as fuck comedy movie too. So it's kind of like, you know, why do movies need to be you know, horror movies strictly just need to be horrific all the time? Why can't there be that campiness and that comedy? And Shaun of the Dead is one that I love. Another one that a lot of the fangs may not know that we can talk about, since we're talking about the parody comedies that kind of came out that were sort of, loosely based off of George Romero's work of stuff, was a movie called Zombies, which is funny as hell. It's one of the craziest movies ever, because if you hadn't seen it, it's like, basically these guys eating this tainted, ice cream that basically turns them into zombies, but they don't see themselves as zombies. They see everybody running. When they see people that's running really, really, really fast, so they're like, they think that everybody else is infected or something like that. But then when you see it from the human side of it, they're all like, "Ugh," like regular zombies. But they're like talking. I'm like, why are they not answering me? I'm talking to like normal, but
Yeah.
because they think that they're talking normal. So it's, I like that. I like the comedy horror aspect of it. And with Shaun of the Dead, like I said, the, those guys are huge George Romero fans. So, that, kind of goes, which, sort of segues into the next zombie movie that George Romero did, which was Land of the Dead.
Yeah, kind of the start of
And
the final trilogy.
yeah, yeah, and he brought George. I mean, not George. George brought Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright, who's the guy who wrote the Shaun of the Dead movie, and put them in the movie. They're like, dude, we want to be. I guess they came to Simon and them came to George and was like, we want to be in the movie, man. We don't even care what we are. You can make us a fucking zombie. We don't need to be in it. And that's exactly what they did. He just put them in a zombie, and they're in the parts where they're getting shot at. It's like kind of like an arcade kind of game for the for the end time apocalypse.
Yeah.
And again with this Land of the Dead, you have him bridging another gap of actors that he's bringing into these movies that ties in with the family ties. And with him working with Dario with the Two Evil Eyes, and movies that he's worked with Dario Argento, this one brings in my beloved Aja Argento and kind of it's kind of the first movie, I guess, for Aja to kind of bring her into the American side of stuff. I know she was, she's done this, she did the Triple X movie and kind of that, but that was kind of like the people noticing who she was. Because I mean, like old school fans like us knew her from back in the day, because like we were talking about when, with a lot of these directors like Kevin Smith putting his daughter in movies and stuff like that. Dario Argento, Aja Argento has been in pretty much every movie he's ever done.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it before. Yeah, some of it's odd that she's in these movies, and some of the things she's doing in some of these movies is odd, which we will discuss later on. Because with while we're talking about Dario, we will drop this exclusive content that we will be doing like we are doing this one for George. We will do his counterpart Dario later on this year, so we'll discuss a little bit more of that Aja Argento, Dario Argento,
Exploitation.
yeah, weirdness. But we'll explain. We'll talk a little bit more of that when it becomes into the Dario side. But yeah, I love. Like I said, I was a huge Aja fan to begin with anyway. So I love this movie for that simple fact that it kind of brought Aja to your normal typical American movie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Land of the Dead also spawned, not only did it actually add to the extension of what Bub created in the learning aspect, where all of a sudden you started realizing, zombies started realizing again that they could fire weapons. They also could go places that others kind of couldn't go, as in breathe underwater. Use that as an example or an asset to be able to travel certain places. And that also did lead to not the creation, of course, because he was cast for that character, but kind of the birth of a pretty well remembered character in George's movies in Big Daddy.
Yeah, yeah, which, it was so cool because you could tell even in this movie when they were talking about it, he's kind of talking to, zombie talking to these other zombies and going and stuff like that. And, they start noticing that he's kind of talking to them and they kind of understand him and he's able to kind of lead these zombies. And in this movie they have a vehicle called the Dead Reckoning, which is a kind of a callback because eventually at one time before it was called Land of the Dead, the movie was going to be called Dead Reckoning. And basically what it did is it shot these kind of fireworks into the sky, and they found out that fireworks apparently attract zombies. So best time of year to be a non-zombie victim would be 4th of July because they love seeing the fireworks. But yeah, eventually he kind of, Big Daddy kind of was like, hey, man, stop paying attention to that shit and let's do what we need to do. And like you were saying, another, like with Bub, it's another iconic character with Big Daddy. And, the actor that played him, Eugene, he's what you call, in the best terms, a media slut or a media whore. But in the best way you can say, he's the greatest guy ever.
He's so great.
And he's so cool with fans. Yeah, yeah, he's such an awesome guy. But this guy is all about marketing himself and marketing. I mean, and not saying it in a bad way because he obviously he has talked to when George was still alive. He was able to to market this character and stuff like that he was in this movie. But yeah, I mean, as a he's basically kind of the I want to call him the Gene Simmons of zombies.
Yeah, he really is. Like when you see this guy at cons, that table / merch booth of his is epic.
Yeah.
But it was awesome. And again, it's also great too with that movie. It's fun because it's George continuing also those long-standing relationships because you've also got Tom Savini coming back again as a fresh new zombie in the biker zombie and all kinds of that cool stuff. But as we transition out of Land of the Dead, we make our way into the next installment of the long-standing series, and that is Diary of the Dead, which, to be honest, and again, this is simply a me thing, it is my least favorite of all of the Deads. And it has nothing to do specifically with the movie. The story arc is fine. The characters portrayed are fine. I personally despise, whatever they're called, shot through another camera movies. Like, what did you call it the other day? However the hell it's called. But anyway, it's like when you're watching a movie through another video camera or another person's kind of point of view.
Yeah, kind of like found footage kind of stuff.
Found footage, yes. Found footage style movies. I despise those movies. There are things I like about them, and I do not hate them all. I just want to put that out there. But just in general, when it comes to collectively, based on my experiences, found footage horror movies rank first in my list of least favorite, subgenres of the horror genre. So again, the story arc of the movie, the premise of the movie, totally fine. Totally fine. The actors and their acting ability, fine. I don't think it's the strongest, but it's not bad acting. And you and I have had plenty of conversations and already recorded multiple episodes involving movies that have bad acting. This, I don't believe, is one of those cases. It's just a personal gripe of mine because it's just not a style that I'm into.
Yeah. I mean, and it's kind of it's this is kind of like a role reversal, I guess, for George Romero, where most of the time, most George Romero movies, he's the stamp godfather of it, and people are imitating him. And this is kind of like where those found footage movies were starting to become super super big, and kind of the main thing of like those at that time period. There were so many, of these movies, like, you have like the Blair Witch that kind of came out. You had the movies like Quarantine that came out. There were so many of these, like, Cloverfield was the a found footage. So there was just so many movies coming out that were this kind of found footage. So it was kind of funny, I guess, sort of, that
Yeah,
George was like, well, yeah, let me jump on a bandwagon, instead of normally the other way around, where everybody was kind of jumping on his bandwagon. He kind of jumped on that bandwagon and made it. So I'm like, I get it. You know what I mean? You're trying to stay, hip in the world of horror movies, and that was at the time was, kind of a mainstream sort of like attempt. So yeah, I don't fault him for making a found footage movie. But yeah, like you said, out of all the Dead series, this is my least favorite movie, because like you said, I mean, there are some that I do enjoy. As far as the found footage in general, yeah, I'm just not really into the shaky camera.
yeah. It's always, and I've always, like I said, I've always also kind of been that way. And the shaky camera has a little bit also something to do with it. And again, I'm absolutely not speaking for anybody outside of myself. I know plenty of people that are into that kind of stuff, but shaky camera stuff like that also does fall into the category of things that break me of the fantasy when I'm watching movies. And it's just one of the reasons it's always been collectively difficult for me to like watch those type of movies and stay into them. There are exceptions to it, but just not many of them. It's just my least favorite subgenre of the horror genre. But let's bring everything to a close. Let's talk a little bit about our final Romero zombie movie, and then of course our final points, our final accolades, and of course our final respects. And we'll wrap things up with Survival of the Dead, which is the final George Romero zombie movie, in not only in the Of the Dead series, but just his zombie movies in general, which gets back to really that traditional formula. I'll be honest, do I think it's overly exceptional? No, not particularly. Of all the traditional zombie movies, I do find it to be the most basic in his arsenal. And I do think that has a lot to do with like any long-standing series, whether it's, Elm Street, Jason, Halloween, Hellraiser, anything like that, you do run the risk or sometimes do hit on a point of stagnant, stale stuff. Again, movie's totally enjoyable. I like it a lot. It's totally fine. It fits the genre, fits the criteria, and gave me exactly what I wanted out of a zombie movie, which is, victims being chased, quality kills, good-looking zombies, and a nice story arc. But do I think it's overly exceptional? Not particularly, no. But do I think it's a dud? Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like, yeah, I believe it's miles and miles more superior than Diary was.
Super
I
superior.
mean, but yeah, in the rankings of Dead movies, it's just above Diary. It's definitely the
Still going to be
least
second to
superior of
last.
the. Yeah, it's still second to last. Doesn't necessarily mean that this is a bad movie, because I liked Survival of the Dead. But it just was that kind of like, you know, beating a dead horse, sort of, like, you know what I mean? Like you said, if you keep going on so long and so long and so long, it's just like, yeah, it definitely wasn't the greatest. But and it, now thinking back, it's kind of like, it kind of does suck, because yeah, it is George Romero's last film, so you never kind of ever want to really shit on anybody's last film. And like I said, I mean, it's definitely, like I said, if anything, I would shit on Diary way more than I would shit on this movie.
Sure.
But then again, there were talks into him doing. There were a few more that he was gonna do, and it kind of made you kind of feel like, we don't know. We're not quite sure whether or not they would have been any good or not. With the way that these Dead series were kind of going. You know, you know, maybe it was, it wouldn't have been a good idea to continue on. But like I said, unfortunately, George passed away before we got a chance to, to see whether or not these newer Dead movies were gonna, be as good as the old school Deads, or were they gonna be kind of like this series of the last of the Dead series where they were, Diary and Survival were kind of like the duds of the series, I guess.
Yeah, where it was, where the original part of the series was, each movie was, topping the one before and stuff like that. And again, while I personally do fancy Dawn above Day, as far as the trajectory arc of the Dead series, you can still keep them in order for the trajectory because again, we personally prefer Dawn, but you got to give credit where credit is due today to again the first what wasn't supposed to be a main character, this character that became iconic in Bub, for what people loved him for and that kind of stuff. It's even something like a movie like The Hills Have Eyes. Michael Berryman is very much associated with his character from The Hills Have Eyes, and he wasn't even really the main character, but he's like on the DVD covers and stuff, and he's like, well, he's just kind of like the secondary brother. He's not even really like a main guy. So anyway, you keep that stuff in mind. But yeah, absolutely. Like, we're not going out to down or shit on anybody's final film, especially people that are no longer with us. But it is kind of one of those things where, do I wish, we talk often about sequels, do I wish we could have seen if maybe there would have been again more of a spike in the Of the Dead series to where it's more about the old school style, or is there maybe a new unique take that could have been done? We'll never know. Or would it have stayed on just kind of this casual plane, as I like to say, where, it's not overly special. They're just kind of like solid movies and stuff like that. And the one thing that is honestly a little bit disappointing, man, with the arrival and subsequent domination that The Walking Dead came and did, dude, how cool would it have been, Devil, to have like George involved, even if not from the beginning, but to suddenly at one point or another get involved? Dude, how cool would that have been?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like, yeah, because like you said, even with The Walking Dead and stuff like that, Robert Kirkman, who created the series, he said if it wasn't for George Romero, he would have never even made this. So it's like, it would have been cool to like see, if maybe one of these later zombie films that George was maybe thinking about, making, maybe he would have brought in like Kirkman to kind of work with that, or some of the, showrunners from the movie. Obviously, like, the main guy who does the effects in The Walking Dead was Greg Nicotero, who was in Day of the Dead and has done some stuff with George. So I mean, that would have been a bridge where maybe, he would have, they could have done something together, and that would have, as far as like another Dead series. But yeah, I mean, with the success of The Walking Dead, maybe it was kind of good for him not to make another zombie films and stuff like that, because people would have, newer generation would have compared it to the Walking Dead series, and you know what I mean. So it's like, it's one of those ones. Like, yeah, I mean, to me, I think it would have been cooler. I wish, we would have gotten a few more, like I said, the last films he did were the Dead series, and I would have liked to see maybe after Survival, because he typically did like, one or two Dead movies and then did a lot of those. I would like to have seen what other movies he would have done that were kind of off genre, like would he have done like a werewolf movie, or
Yeah,
would he would have done something like this, or just something, something else, or what other project would he would have done with Dario, or what other Stephen King movie would he would have probably have liked to have done and stuff like that. So it's like, it's one of those things that, it's sad that that he's no longer with us, but then again, most people who are directors, especially directors in this genre, you know don't even have nearly half the body of work that he had. And just like anybody else, just like a writer and just like an actor and just like a musician and just like anybody in entertainment, not all your finished products are always going to be the greatest stuff in the world. You're going to have a bad album, you're going to have a bad song, or you're going to have a couple bad movies that maybe not, maybe weren't as great. But that doesn't, for someone like George, it's like, you can't let, a couple of those movies, downplay any of his work that he's, brought, and even like I said, even with those movies, like even with the Diary of the Dead, you know what I mean? It's like, without the movies that he did, you wouldn't have had some of these subsequent zombie movies ever. So it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, to me it's kind of like one of those things that, like, I always joke around with everybody with what's his name, Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan can make an album where he's farting on a microphone for 12 songs and still win 9 billion awards and probably sell 9 billion records because he's fucking Bob Dylan. And it's like this, where it's like, yeah, George Romero can make a shitty movie, but us fans are gonna go see it because it's George's name on it, regardless of, we might go out of it, like even with Diary, we're like, oh god. Even when that came out, it's like, really, George, you're really gonna do this found footage kind of stuff? I mean, I got it, because like I said, at that time it was huge, but as bad as it was, if they re-released it right now in the theaters, I would probably still go back in the theater and see it again, just because it's a George movie, and how much is we loved George and his movies and his creatives and his mind.
definitely,
Uh,
absolutely, brother. And as we wrap everything up and talk momentarily just about like his legacy and impact, I mean, the fact of the matter is, the bottom line to it is like, there is no gray. There is no gray. It's straight black and white. His legacy stays in my eyes untarnished. His influences, as far as who he's influenced, what he's contributed to, and what he started, is second to none. And of course, that's why everybody has opinions. We don't have to love everything. We can respect everything, or we can understand everything. We don't have to like everything. But the bottom line is, when it comes to George A. Romero, I mean, for everything he's contributed, what he's shown to the fans, what he's given us in his work, and the stuff that he's also been able to give back, whether it was jobs for certain people, continuous contacts, special effects artists that have gone on to be huge. I mean, you can't fault him for anything. And the fact of the matter is, he's George A. Romero, man. And you can aim for the head, you can either even shoot for the head, but nothing's taking that guy down.
Yeah, yeah, and like I say, it was the couple of times that I got to meet him, like he was just like the coolest guy ever, you know what I mean? And he'll remember you, you know what I mean? Like, it's like the last time I met him, at Monster Mania, he's like, you kind of look sort of familiar. You were from Pittsburgh, weren't you? And I was like, yeah, yeah. He's like, yeah, I think you were at the premiere of Land. I was like, yeah, yeah. I'm like, how the hell does he remember? I'm like, I literally just was like, walked up, shook his hand, and talked to him for like 5 minutes at the premiere, and that literally was enough. But yeah, that's the cool thing about like a lot of these actors from that movie, because I've met a bunch of the Night of the Living Dead guys, and like I said, we met Barbara and Johnny at at a convention in Walker Stalker in Atlanta. And when you're going to a photo op, for fans who have gone to the conventions, photo ops are typically like, come in, say hi for a quick second, and get your picture and get out. And we walk up and we're like, hey, how you doing? They're like, hey, how you doing? We're like, oh, I'm doing pretty good. They're like, what part of Pittsburgh are you from? They already knew, like, they could hear my Pittsburgh accent, like, automatically. So we're having like this like 5 minute conversation, like while the photographer's like, come on, like, get you rolling. But that's the cool thing about, like, yeah, like the people he's worked with, and I've got to meet, I've got to meet. I haven't got a chance to meet Dario. I almost had a chance to meet Dario, but unfortunately he had to cancel a convention I went to, which was kind of cool, and it kind of sucked, but it got me the chance to meet Corey Feldman, so that was kind of cool. But it sucks that I never met Dario and haven't met Dario yet. I've got to meet Aja a couple of times, but yeah, it just reminds you of like just the cool people that worked with George Romero, and the how awesome the people he worked with, from, like I said, from everybody, from the writers to the small actors that were the zombies. When you go to these, if you go to any of these like conventions, like the Pittsburgh conventions, always, like the Monroeville one, always has a lot of the old school zombies that were in Night of the Living Dead, or some of them that are still still with us with the Day of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Those actors might have been in a movie for like 5 minutes or 5 seconds, but they're always like super cool. They always like tell you some cool stories. And every person that I've ever talked to about George, and when it comes to, I understand people don't like to talk, even when he was alive, but especially now that he's passed away. I know people don't typically like to talk ill about the dead, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody ever even have like any bad stories about him at all, working with him or just knowing him. Like, it's very rare, especially in a genre like the horror film, and being a director, and directors usually tend to have to be kind of harsh and kind of strict to keep their actors in line and stuff like that. And some people have talked about, like, this director was hard to work with, or that director was hard to work with. People like, we're big huge fans of Rob Zombie, but a lot of people have talked about working with him. He's really tough to work with because he's a visionary, and he sees how he wants to do it. And if you're not doing it how he sees it, he's going to let you know. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he's a bad guy to work with, but you never heard any, like, it's crazy. You never hear any stories about anybody ever saying anything, remotely, like, not necessarily bad, but just like, even just kind of like, oh, George did this or George did that. Always nice things.
Absolutely. No, 100% for sure. But Fangs, Fiends, friends of the genre, and fans first and foremost of George A. Romero, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this very, very special episode of Vampire and Devil, as we feature, pay tribute, and break down our loves and lusts of the various George A. Romero catalog. So we appreciate you guys so much. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. So remember, the devil may be in disguise. You may lust for the vampire. But the facts of the matter is, at the bottom of the barrel and deep down in hell and peeking out of our coffin, it's always about horns up and fangs out. You take care, fiends. You take care, fangs.